What is expectation hangover and how can you overcome expectation hangovers? Having worked with many high achievers and being one myself, I know exactly what expectation hangovers feel like and what we can do to overcome them. The core notion and the core idea behind expectation hangover is that when you have a certain goal or certain project and you don't reach it and you feel this bitter disappointment, this is a typical expectation hangover. But what's interesting is it also can happen when you actually reach the goal. Because when you reach your goal and then you don't have the feeling that you thought you would have, maybe you finally are president of this club, or you finally become the CEO of that company, or you finally launch your own business, or you finally become a millionaire and you're not satisfied or fulfilled. This is also expectation hangover because you believe that when you would finally reach this certain point in your life or in your work, you would be fulfilled. This is something I cover a lot in several episodes on the arrival fallacy, this notion that when I finally reach the top of the mountain, I'll be happy. This doesn't work out. Many reasons why this doesn't work out. First and foremost, because we're placing expectation onto the future and we're not living it now. But also, how can you finally be happy at a given place if all through the journey you're not feeling happy? Because then you're not developing and cultivating the emotions around joy and gratitude and happiness. And then when you just reach another point, your body emotionally, physically, hormonally isn't used to producing these emotions. So why would you suddenly feel happy when you reach that goal? This is something I struggled with a lot, which is why I've written about it a lot. The way I used to function, because I'm extremely goal driven, it was I would just push through the journey to reach the goal and then be constantly disappointed and have an expectation hangover when my emotions wouldn't meet what I thought they would when I reached that goal. And then generally the strategy, tell me if I'm wrong, of high achievers is let's just set another goal because it didn't work this time, but for this amazing goal for sure I'll be happy. No, it doesn't work. It doesn't work with the smaller goals, the bigger goals. Of course, if you're creating an entire transformation in your life, maybe becoming healthier, for instance, or changing radically your career, yes, that might lead to joy and happiness, but then it's a whole process. It's not just reaching the end goal that brings joy. It's the change in identity, the change in your environment. All of these things add up and bring that happiness and joy, but it's not just that sudden change and it's not just suddenly achieving and reaching that goal. So what can you do when it comes to expectations hangover? How can you deal with either the feeling of disappointment once you have reached the goal and you're not as happy as you want it to be, or also equally the feeling of disappointment when you don't reach the goal? Maybe this was something that you really wanted your entire life, to be a professional ballerina, and you don't get into the school. Or you really wanted to be able to buy that house for your family and you're not able to afford that house, etc., etc., etc. And obviously there are some examples that maybe speak a lot more to you in your own life, depending on your circumstances, where you live, the type of work you have, etc. But the idea stays the same. What do you do when you are disappointed by the result? So let's look more at this scenario, the one where you don't actually reach the goal, because I've covered a lot in the different episodes on the arrival fallacy, what you can do to deal with the feeling of disappointment when you do reach your goal and you're not happy. So let's look at what happens when you don't actually get those results and you have this bitter disappointment. There are two main things you can do. This comes back to what Tony Robbins calls LC equals BP. He always says the equation of happiness is LC equals BP. What does this stand for? Life condition equals blueprint. Life condition is your current reality, what you're dealing with now. Blueprint is the expectations you have set for yourself in your life. So maybe if you're 30 and you're a woman, you thought you'd be married with children by now. This is a blueprint. This is an expectation you've set on your life. And maybe if you're not, that's your life condition, what your actual reality is, you're feeling disappointed. You're feeling this expectation hangover. How come I'm 30 and not married and without children? This is terrible because in my blueprint, in my expectation, that's what I was expecting. What can be done? Well, it's pretty simple. If we look at it as an equation, that's why I like to use this example. You can either change LC, your life condition, or blueprint, your expectations. In the case of this woman who's not married yet or doesn't have children, Maybe she can take some steps towards obviously finding a relationship, having children, etc. That would be changing the life condition. But it could also be, and maybe to begin with, this is more pragmatic change. Okay, those were my expectations. That is what I used to believe needed to happen in my life by the time I turned 30. How about I shift a bit my perspective here? And this is so important. I really can't stress how important this is, because if we get stuck in a model that we believe is how life should be, how our work should be, how our health should be, then we're setting ourselves up for chronic disappointment, chronic expectation hangover. Really simple example. Let's say you used to be super, super fit. Met someone recently, for instance. They broke their leg. They used to be a great runner, did marathons, etc. Broke their leg. Now they can run a bit, which is great, post-operation, etc. But obviously not at the same level or the same pace or speed or distance that they could when they were a runner before breaking their leg. Now, in this case, can they change their life condition? Can they change the reality? A bit, through physiotherapy, through continuing to exercise, through getting lots of sleep to regenerate the body, etc. But that might not be sufficient to get back to where they were before. So in this case, we need to change the blueprint. In this case, we need to change the expectations here. What's the new expectation with these new conditions? Not just what's a new expectation, but what's a new pace or a new journey or a new process that makes a lot more sense given this change. And if you think about it, how often do we do this? How often do we actually reevaluate our expectations and our blueprint when our life changes? Not so often, because we have something fixed in our mind. And if when you were younger, you were always able to do something and suddenly you can't, this is when you feel chronically disappointed, upset, frustrated, irritated. Oh, I used to be so good at XYZ. Why can't I do it anymore? I used to be really good at running, or I used to be fantastic at speaking, and now I can't speak as well. If we're able to pause and appreciate, be grateful for the other things we have going on in our life and readapt to this new pace, this new change, transformation that we have going on, this is where we can find joy and fulfillment again. But if you want chronic expectation hangovers, if you're hooked on them, this is an easy road. Just continuously expect things that cannot happen and you will be continuously disappointed. Now, what happens with things that can be reached, but we just haven't reached them yet, or we're not sure we can reach them? So in the examples I've said is, okay, let's say your life condition really doesn't match your blueprint and you're not able to reach them at all. How do you deal with that? That's one thing. But let's say it's something you can do. Maybe you could start your own business at one point, or maybe you could grow it to 7 figures, or maybe you could start exercising again, but you feel like when you try, you keep failing. It's not as easy as you saw. You're not really reaching the results. How do you deal with those disappointments and those expectations? Because in this case, it's not a matter of radically removing them, whereas that would be the case if your life conditions have changed so much that you can't actually meet your expectations. In this case, it's a matter of how do you keep these high standards, these high results you're aiming for, all while appreciating where you're at. And this is where things get really tricky, because we don't want to lower the bar too low, because that decreases motivation. It also makes you less likely to reach any goals, and it leads to less fulfillment. Actually having big, ambitious goals does help with motivation, ambition, progress, growth, and it helps us to feel more fulfilled. So having great goals is still fantastic. At the same time, if these goals become the expectation, you just expect that you will reach this stage in your business, for instance, or in your health or relationships, then when you don't reach it, expectation hangover. So how do we manage this? How do we manage to have these goals that we're aiming for, we're excited about, but at the same time, not feel so low that we're not there yet? And this is where we need to combine this magic formula of high standards and compassion for the journey. High standards mean, yes, amazing goals. Yes, this is where I'm going. This is my vision. But they're not expectations. This is very different. Expectation is this should happen, and if it hasn't happened, this won't do. Expectation is believing that it should come served on a platter, and if you're not getting it immediately, then you're dissatisfied and frustrated. high standards and vision is, I am going to sign up to go on this hike all the way to the top of the mountain. We'll see if we get there, but that's the vision. I can see the top of the mountain and I am committed and I'll do everything I can to reach the top of the mountain. But if for whatever reason, altitude sickness, weather conditions, I get stuck 3/4 of the way and have to go back, I at least know that I did my very best and I enjoyed the climb and the hike till there. This is tricky because if you are too complacent on it, then it's not high standards enough, and then you feel disappointed in yourself for not having done your best. So we don't want overly complacency, but we don't want overly expectations. I imagine this a bit like walking on a tight rope and not falling on one side or the other. Not falling complacency, not falling expectation hangover. Complacency, and instead just staying on the middle of enjoying the journey, compassion for the journey, gratitude for where you're now, for each step that you're doing along the way, enjoying the process, enjoying the journey. And at the same time, you see the vision at the end. You don't forget about the vision, don't forget about the big goals, but you're okay with where you're at. This philosophy and this way of looking at things, it's not a tick, it's not a daily box that you could just tick. It's an ongoing journey. It's constantly catching yourself. Are you falling into expectation hangover? Start to notice the symptoms. Oh, I should be there by now. Why haven't I managed? Why is this taking so long? Feeling that impatience and frustration. Those are the symptoms of the expectation hangover. Now, complacency, on the other hand, would look something like, oh, well, it's fine. It takes the time it takes. We'll see. Maybe I won't get there. Doesn't really matter. Nothing really matters. Let's just see. That's lack of ambition and vision. So we don't want too much of either extreme because, first of all, we don't feel as fulfilled, but also you're less likely to reach that vision. If you're constantly in expectation hangover, you'll end up really bitter and disappointed and you quit and your energy isn't in it. If you're constantly complacent, you also quit because what's the point? You're happy where you're at. It's okay. We want to maintain this balance, this fire, these high standards, and also appreciation for each step along the journey. This is a matter of constantly checking in with yourself, constantly tuning in to see, where am I now? Am I too complacent or am I too an expectation hangover? And depending on your personality, you probably have a tendency to do one or the other more. There probably is one aspect where you're constantly maybe in expectation hangover or constantly in complacency. What your life look like if you're constantly in the complacent side is less actions, less progress, less movement and momentum. When you're constantly in expectation hangover, a lot of actions, a lot of movement, but constantly dissatisfied. And what's interesting is both sides kind of envy each other. The overly high achievers with chronic expectation hangovers envy the complacent people because they're so satisfied. They've achieved a lot less or maybe made less progress, but they're happy and they're fulfilled in their life. Oh, that must be nice. People that are maybe slightly more complacent, maybe less high achievers or maybe a little more stuck, and so they're trying to have more gratitude for the journey, they envy the high achievers that seem to be making all these big progress, but they're not really happy anyway because of the arrival fallacy and the expectation hangover. We don't want to be either extreme, we want to be somewhere grounded, balanced in the middle. Appreciate the journey, take your baby steps, learn, fall, start again, have that clear vision in mind, and just tap in and notice, are you a little more on one side or the other? And ask yourself, what would make you better? How can you deal and overcome this expectation hangover? One last very important point here is most of the time, the high achievers that I work with, they are always aiming for these big lofty goals and they get very disappointed if they don't reach them because they're seeking internal but also external validation through them. Once you're able to find it within you to know that you're worthy as you are, that you don't need to achieve anything to prove your worthiness to the world, that achieving these goals and these progress, it's just for the journey, it's just for growing, for fun, for contribution and impact, then there's a little less pressure and there's a little less need and desperation to prove to the world that you're worthy. Very important to remember. You don't need to prove anything to anyone. This is about the journey, it's about the balance, and it's about reaching goals that matter to you for your own progress, fulfillment, and contribution. If this is something that you would like to explore a bit deeper, I'm opening up just a few slots to work with founders and entrepreneurs one-on-one through in-depth, deep coaching. So if you feel this is something that you're interested in and you would like to explore, you can click the link below in the description, both on YouTube and on my podcast. Would love to hear, what did you get out from today's episode? What will help you in the future to overcome expectation hangovers, and how can you keep yourself on track towards your vision and your goals? Thank you for tuning in today.